Welcome to the UP Fine Arts Gallery, the official creative compound and exhibition site of the UP Diliman College of Fine Arts. Walk-in guests are welcome from Tuesdays to Saturdays, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. For inquiries, email us at cfagallery.upd@up.edu.ph.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, my name is Antonni Cuesta. I'm from Photography Chismis. So that's not a joke. that's the name of the project. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's a very humid afternoon. Hindi talaga angkop ang damit kanluranin. Pasensya na. Thank you for joining this afternoon. So we have here Sir Nap Jamir II. We'll do a conversation first and then we'll open the floor later. So yun. So let's start with so some introductions lang. So this project is a logical development from a project we've been doing with Photography Chismis. So one series that we've started doing with different organizations is this, no? So looking back, thinking forward, select themes in the history of photography in the Philippines. So I'm also very careful or conscious in using the word Philippine photography or the phrase Philippine photography. So it's a current conversation that is there any claim that we can make that there's a certain thing as Philippine photography. So as of now, provisionally, we use photography in the Philippines. So it's more broad and more inclusive, I guess. So that's different traditions. And specifically, this conversation we have today is also derived from a previous talk or lecture we shared in other groups, no? So it's the formalist versus conceptual tradition in Philippine photography. Siguro to introduce lang muna the project. So my name is Antonni Cuesta. So I'm the project lead for Photography Chismis, as mentioned a while ago. I am also a teacher from Taft, and I have some co-faculties here. Tapos, what is the project about? So Photography Chismis, the broad idea is promoting meaningful conversations about photography in the Philippines. So that's a general project. So there are several components, conversations, and so some would be research, some would be publication. So in a way, we're spread in different ways. We have different strategies and trajectories when we do this project. So in case you haven't heard, so you can check us in Instagram. So our main platform is Instagram and Facebook. But as much as possible, if we can find partners, then we collaborate with organizations and institutions. And having said that, we're very thankful that the UP Fine Arts through Prof. Ito gave us the platform to do this project. No, Prof. Ito, do you wanna say something? So I'll turn over for some introduction lang for Prof. Ito.
Sorry, sir. Thank you, Antonni, and thank you, Sir Nap, and thank you, everyone, for being present today. This talk is part of the exhibition of Sir Nap here at Gallery 2, which has been running since February 28. No? So this is the last week of Sir Nap's exhibition, and the talk is also our way of continuing yung dialogue, discourse, and sharing of the very personal stories and journey that we are all interested to hear about. Yung exhibit ni Sir Nap, this is one of several exhibits that we're holding here at the gallery, centering on photography this year. So we started with the show of Professor Johnny Reynoso from the Department of Visual Communications. Then Sir Nap's show since February 28. And this will be followed as well by several other shows of classes in photography and other faculty as well. So we hope to put the spotlight on photography this year through the gallery. And maraming salamat, Antonni, sa Photography Chismis for collaborating with the gallery to bring this meaningful conversation with Sir Nap to us today. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Profito. So, Sir Nap, ano no, it's nice to have you again. Just to give an idea to our audiences, we had parang 2 or 3 conversations already na personal. Kasi I was very interested on yung trajectory nga, or at least that tradition of the quote-unquote conceptual tradition. But later, Sir Nap has some comments about the terminology, no, yung conceptual na yun. I remember, no, so when we had that conversation sa kabilang school sa Katipunan, sa Ateneo, the event was photography and philosophy. Yun naman yung topic dun. So, philosophy and photography. And you mentioned in our event that, ano, no, what a time to live. Especially for those who are interested in photography as a discourse, photography as an activity, photography as labor. Because we've reached this time, now we have these kinds of explorations. How I understand that is there's an emphasis on the difference between how photography was talked about before and compared to what we have right now. So, Sir Nap, is it okay if we ask you, siguro give us 3 main difference from how photography used to be discussed or talked about as compared to today?
Thank you. That's an interesting question. Yung for me, no, photography, when I started taking pictures or I started doing the kind of work that I do, photography was not necessarily in its infancy. I mean, photography historically here has been around, but a discourse on photography was very, very rare. I mean, like if you do any like critical thoughts or writings on art itself, was always never on photography. I mean, we had great writers like Eric Torres. We had people who wrote knowingly on a lot of other artworks, but photography was always an aside. That's always been like a secondary art form, if I have to call it an art form. And the writings were very rare. Most of the writing that was done on photography was actually more like press releases. There was really no critical discussion or discourse on it. So even during the time when I was active from the starting in the 70s, there was a bit more progress going on because of like the Cultural Center of the Philippines. I mean, people like Bobby Chabet and Ray Albano, they were very cognizant of what the importance of photography was and as an art form and as a form of expression. And they recognized it. In fact, I'm very grateful that when Bobby Chabet created this program, it was called 13 Artists. So it was something that the CCP would hold every 2 years at the time, where they'd select 13 promising artists in the field of art and recognize them and give them the opportunity to show their works. And that started in 1970 with Bobby Chabet starting it, and then the next year, the next biennial in 1972, it was already Ray Albano who started it. And 2 years after, 1974, Ray Albano initiated or expanded the concept of artists involved being recognized. So he started including theater. He started including also photography. So that was the first time in 1974 that they recognized photography as an art form and gave it recognition. And I was one of the first ones to get that award. So we were actually 2 photographers. One was Boldy Tapales, who was more or less, if you have to categorize his work, it was more on the formalist side. He did landscapes. And again, as a counterpoint, I think Ray decided to pick me because of the work that I was doing at the time, which was a little bit more different. It was more the work that recognized artists would do using photography as a medium, not necessarily as a photographer. And right now, at this point in time, like you said, there's become more and more critical writing on photography, but sometimes I think it's become to the point of being too verbose. There's too much philosophy involved. Sometimes for me, I'm a very reactive person. When I see something, I react. I try to understand what's behind it. And I try to understand in the sense that it is within the context of my knowledge. Of course, it's nice to have intelligent writing on photography because it also educates our audience and expands it, and it has a tendency to expand. I mean, make people more curious and more aware, other than photography in magazines, so and in books. So.
So, actually interesting that you mentioned, siguro two main areas from what you said, no? So one would be critical approaches or critical writing specifically. And maybe there's also a thread that we can explore later, sir. The idea of legitimization. So we try not to parang frame the conversation in an adversarial nature, that we go against an institution. But interesting that you mentioned, sir, that during those times, at least, you mentioned that photography seemed to be a second-rate art or art form. So we can explore that later. For now, siguro I'll work with that idea muna na sinabi na, yung idea of the conceptual. So I think we had several conversations on that term conceptual or conceptualist. So I was showing also kanina when we were talking that how do you derive that term based on a literature? So one could be the writings of Johnny Manahan specifically. So I think a lot of writers would derive that term conceptual from Johnny Manahan. And siguro maybe a broader source would obviously be si Sir Chabet, I think, diba? So to a certain extent, dun mostly nagmumula yung terminology na yun as it arrived or is assimilated in the Philippines. Siyempre, it started somewhere else. But you mentioned that somehow that term conceptual for you is you're not very comfortable with it. Let's say it that way.
For me, around in the 70s, because art in the Philippines at that time was a lot of traditional artists, painters. So when you talk about artists, there will be painters, there will be sculptors, and not much of visual. If I have to use the word, is people who do artworks which are not art on the wall. They do installations, they do stagings, and people started calling it conceptual art. I mean, the fact that you do something, it's not necessarily, it becomes like a self-serving term, conceptual. It's like you give too much credence to the work. I mean, mostly that kind of work, especially when you talk about like specific to photographers. Not all photographers are conceptual photographers. I'm saying photography, like for me, if you see my work here, I did not go to the usual route of what a photographer would do, which would be a reactive kind of thing. You do salon, if you have to call it salon, it's something when you capture, you see an image, you record it. And through your artistry, you give it your own sense of vision or your own sense of style, if I have to use the word style. That's how photography, for me, it wasn't that way. When I started doing photography, I was really very much involved in film. I wanted to do films, and for me, cinema was really what I was really interested in. And while at the same time, I was also discovering photography. Though, again, that is like an oxymoron because my father was a photographer and a very good photographer at that. And I grew up in that world. I mean, you see all these things, you know, I mean, s- landscapes, salon type, you know, and I was immersed in that. And for me, I wasn't, I wasn't necessarily interested in that, if I have to use the word. Because at the time, also, you have to understand that my generation, I started working or being curious about photography when I was like around 19 or 18 years old, and that was like in the early 70s. So 1970, and that was the time of Woodstock, the age of Aquarius. So it was in conjunction with the lifestyle of kids growing up. I was an 18-year-old kid. I mean, you know, so it's like kids now that they have their own way of expressing themselves, and they have their own influences. For me, I was influenced by that time, that sense of freedom, like the hippies, that kind of sense. And also, uh, a corollary to that would be, of course, the exploration of thought, changing your thought. So, I mean, I'm putting myself forward here. Uh, I'm putting myself on the line. I mean, it was really a lot. I was very much involved in mind expanding experimentations, if I have to use that word. So I discovered these things, and it really not jump started it, but it gave a different dimension of my way of thinking. I was very much into literature prior to that. I mean, I read a lot and I wanted to write, I did poetry, but never taking pictures, you know, because the mere fact that I see my father taking pictures, you know, like a son to his father, di ba? I don't want to do what he's doing. That's there you go. That's my dad on the right side. And he was a very good photographer. He was very well known, and it was he contributed a lot to the field. But for me, that wasn't really where I was at the time. You know, I mean, parang being rebellious. So I was of a different ilk. I mean, it's interesting. I thought when I was already beginning to do this kind of work, I thought, why don't I have a show with my father? My father was a great portrait photographer. He did really interesting portraits, especially artists, because my father's contemporaries were the 13 moderns, people like Vicente Manansala, Cesar Legazpi. So my world was surrounded by that. I was surrounded by art. And he did great portraits of these people. I don't know if he's influenced by Cartesh or Steichen or Arnold Newman, but interesting, very interesting portraits. And I said, what if I do my own sense? What if my work, like this panel here of portraits from Cinemalaya directors, that is the kind of work I do compared to what he did. I mean, which is straightforward photography. It was more challenging because for them, there are no tools involved. For me, I have a lot of tools. I have a lot of crutches, if you have to say. So because my imaging is a result of a lot of different media and a result of different techniques. So that was actually what it was all about. So for me, when I started taking pictures, I would do concepts. Like my first works were called Autoretrato series. And it's all self-portraits. And it actually dealt with self-destruction. Literally killing myself, finding ways and means to kill myself. So, like the first ones, but then at the time, photography was a two-dimensional medium for me. I wanted to break out of that again because of that extra ingredient in my mind, you know. I think beyond, I said, what if I go beyond that, like in cinema, what if I break the fourth wall? So I said, what if there's life beyond the print itself? What if you jump out, what if that image jumps out of that two-dimensional frame surface and interacts with people outside? So that's what I did. I started pictures where I'd have myself, you know, picking up a knife and stabbing myself. And then at that point, it's still part of a two-dimensional reality. After that, I go beyond it by actually introducing a physical slice on the frame where the stab wound was supposed to be. And then I started having blood, liquid coming out of that. So it transcended that two-dimensional boundary of a photograph. And the other ones will I'd tear myself. I'll tear myself. It's all there if you want to, if you're curious, you'll see it's there. That's my first sets of work. So it's really like, not really self-destruction, like artists like, let's say, Vito Aconzi, who would actually, or Chris Burden, who would actually would have himself crucified on top of a Volkswagen. Because it's like, his art was body art. Pain to himself. So in the same sense, for me, photography, that's how I looked at my photographs. So in that instance, I could use the word concept, because I did not see something and something outside the real world, and I immediately said, this thing struck me, I'll take a picture. That's not my work. They're great, like if you have to use the word formalist, that's how I would categorize it. You actually react. It's either recording reality, it's something preserving a memory. So it's something that's there outside of your realm. In my context, I create that. If I wanted a memory, I will create the memory and I will stage it and I will photograph it. So that was what it was. So in that sense, I can forgive myself by saying that was concept driven, not conceptual.
So, sir, I'm flashing, So this is not this is not your auto-retrato, but this is also part of your Foto-Me series, if I'm not mistaken, no? So this is part of the Foto-Me series, and you mentioned your collaborator would be.
He's a filmmaker. He's passed away. He's called Ticoy Aguilos. Direct Ticoy Aguilos. So we are good friends. We've been together because I started getting into film at that time. But like with this, the things that I did after that, my first set of works, was really more of the medium itself. For me, photography was like not to take good pictures, to take beautiful landscapes, to take wonderful sunsets, to take very pretty, images of pretty girls. That wasn't really me. For me, it was like, this is a medium, it's like a piece of object. That's how I wanted to look at it. I wanted to take a look at it and says, okay, film, camera, lens, what if? So this became an offshoot of that. My exploration, I said, Foto-Me machines. These are structured photo-taking devices. You cannot do anything about it, but I challenged myself and said, I can do my own expression on Foto-Me machines. And so it became, for me, initially was like Foto-Me. It became a visual pan, a literary pan. Foto-Me. Foto-Me, if I use a mirror, photo you. So I did that. I brought a mirror inside the Foto-Me the booth. So I'd take a picture, I let the machine take my picture, then I'll bring up a small mirror, and it will reflect the machine itself. So photo you, then Foto-Me, photo you. And then I started bringing mirrors outside the booth so that if I angle the mirror, it will actually show landscapes or things outside of the booth itself. And after a while, I put another mirror so that the Foto-Me booth will actually do a self-portrait. So that kind of thing, I was always challenging that. It was more, if I have to use the word structural, I was more interested in that kind of direction. And even I discovered stencil, Rizo. It's called Rizo now, right? But before it was called stencil. People would think stencil for mass-produced prints and images. I discovered that they had photo stencils. So I started having my pictures stenciled. And then I would print it on Uh, I would have it printed on printing on seri- no, printing paper. So it became work. I used an etching press, and that's what I would use. And I also discovered Xerox. So I started working with Xerox machines. So it's really an exploration. For me, it wasn't like I'm going to be the greatest sunset photographer. I'm going to be the greatest landscape. No, that's not me. For me, it was like, I'm curious. I find something that involves photography. I'll explore it and I'll see what I can do with it.
Sir, siguro no, for those na who don't know yet, probably you'd be wondering if that title Walang Ibig Sabihin is I don't know, something ano ba? Well, provocative, I guess, di ba?
Provocative
Oh,
and whimsical. Kasi for me,
whimsical.
for me again, the medium is the message. The medium, the me, the medium is the message. Like Pakluan says. For me, I don't care about the image. I care about what the message is. Like, for me, it's whimsical. Walang ibig sabihin. I can put a provocative title to it and it wouldn't really register for me. Things like that. So my way of like even putting titles into pictures, of course it's become like a habit after a while. But again, it's really more, it's like one of my works here. It's called ASSHOLE. You know, it's an asshole. And it's a picture of me in my, you know, portrait of me, and then having a pencil and then piercing my eye. So the left side of my eyeglasses has the word ass, and the other picture has the word hole. I mean, the physical. So a play on words, and I use multiple choices and things like that. So more of that.
There has been a term that you mentioned, sir, a counterpoint. Also, it shows on the way you explain. Somehow, we're saying this is one practice of photography which focuses on landscapes, portraits, and then there's something else. So, siguro to give some context lang for those who don't, well, I would assume you've encountered these distinctions probably in some readings in your classes. Again, we're doing this, I show this, sir, no? So, the way we're phrasing it, the formal and the conceptual, to a certain extent, both are formalisms. But in the context of this discussion, at least, we are doing this not to be adversarial to another tradition. What we're just trying to say is that in practice, there has been this historical thread of people doing it this way. So it could be called salon, it could be called modernist. I think in some papers they use it modernist, and then and when you go to art studies, iba rin yung ibig sabihin ng modernist. Kaya just a disclaimer that we're using this very loosely. The terms that we're using, formalist and conceptual, are to a certain extent propaedeutic, diba? So it's provocative. It allows us to anchor. I think you also used the term, sorry, kanina, to anchor the discussion. But these are both provisional. Again, there was also a mention a while ago regarding the writings about photography, photo history, photo criticism, and that's one of the, I think, magandang explore moving forward. I think some writers here would know yung the current literature of where these terms are coming from. But I'm sure there could be some opposition. Wait, you're saying that conceptual is not a modernist mode of art making. So yun. So take note lang na these are contentious right from the start. They're provisional, but I'm using it to anchor lang the distinctions that Sir Nap is using. A while ago also there was a term na used, no, salon photography. I'm not sure if it's also discussed in the photo classes. Kasi I think we don't want then to phrase it na salon photography as diminutive. Kasi the salon as the space wherein salon art, diba? So the salon where you display art and then exhibit art, that comes from a very long history then of in the arts, in the field of arts. So pero when you go to photography, salon photography has a certain burden. So some of my co-teachers here were very quote unquote critical then to salon photography, not because of its focus on the technique. We're sometimes critical to it because somehow historically it has boxed in the tradition of photography in the Philippines, wherein when you talk about photography, it's salon, meaning the rule of thirds. Again, I'm not saying this as diminutive and adversarial. No, I'm just saying I'm using the word salon as a tradition among many traditions. We're not trying to make a parang opposition, except for a distinction. So, yung the conceptual na terminologies na ginagamit kanina, kadalasan yun din yung associations. So, yan yung mga modernist, technique, marketplace, pictorial photography. And recently, I think around 2000, now there has been a distinction between photography and photo media because there's a lot of mixed media works that are coming from the galleries during around 2000 to 2010. So, quote-unquote, naglalabasan yung photo-based works sa Philippine galleries. So, that one would be silver lens, diba? But as Sir Nap mentioned, that mode of art making, that mode of art production is not new. That has been done since the 70s and 60s. So yun lang So para lang to help lang yung parang to ground lang din yung terminologies. Baka kasi iba yung terminologies ng conceptual sa conceptualist in terms of the fine arts history. Sa art studies as compared to the way that photographers use that term. Minsan meron din kaming napapansin na we're using the same words but it might mean a little bit different. Tapos, binention din ni Sir Nap kanina yung na regarding the structural. I'll just show Sir yung structural na terminology. So, that word structural or structuralist, I think it's also a bit different to how you're using it, Sir, no? Pero just to show din parang for those who are interested sa research, so that term is provided here, no? So, here. So this is a curatorial text by Ray Albano. No? So I just emphasize yung word na structuralist. So in case lang na you want to do some further readings on that word structuralist, so it comes from one source could be this. And during that time, nag-grow na yung idea of semiotics with Barthes and Derrida, all of those, and how it relates to art production. During that time, the spirit of the time was that there's a certain drive towards self-actualization, if you want to introduce a psychology term, and yung idea of freedom and emancipation. Aside from that, sir, they were also very political. So, I mean, asking for freedom, or at least that need or internal drive for freedom, that is more or less political. So, if I ask you, sir, do you consider yourself political in your works?
That's a very provocative question. When I can say political for me, it would be more of like a point of view. I mean, politics in society. Again, it talks about changing society. It talks about forms of government. It talks about methods of governance. That, for me, in my work, the work I do, it's politicized. If I have to use again, I don't want to use that word, but it is contextualized in that aspect because I'm making a definite statement of what kind of work I do. Of course, within the context of our world development, because again, I'll be the first to say that I am not an isolated person living in an island. I mean, even in those times, in 70s, there's a lot of influence. For me, again, like they say, man's consciousness is shaped by his environment. And so, what my mind was shaped, my art making was shaped by the inputs and influences that I was coming across during my time out in those days. So I was of social change. I was conscious of, but it's, I find it. I found, well, it's hard to me to articulate this, but I found it really removed from the way I make if I have to use my artwork, removed from within a political context thoroughly. It was like a reaction, but in the way I do my works. I mean, I could have gone out and shot, though I did, because I wasn't just an artist in those times. I was also working as a photographer and also as a filmmaker, documentary. I was doing news. So I was covering all of these things. So I don't know if it was a case of being immunized or being having so much violence that it became anesthesia for me, that I could separate my life as a cameraman. I was doing some work with ABS, and my work as my life. It's strange because parang it became a retreat for me to doing my own artwork. But of course, unconsciously, probably, it was something that would creep into the kind of work I do. I mean, like, in the portraits there of the directors of Cinemalaya that I did, one thing that I liked doing was the portrait of Burgos, J.B.L. Burgos. I liked it because his work is a very political filmmaker. And I liked that context, the fact that he had masks to use. So I liked it, and I embedded a small image there. Medyo hidden, but I have a small image there. It's just a statement, a small statement on violence. You know, because if you get exposed to too much, I mean, I was conscious of that. I mean, since being in news, I knew that I was shooting during the election, during Marcos Osmeña times, and I saw all of that, and I saw the demonstrations in Mendiola. But you know, I had friends, people like Alex Baluyot, you know, Luis Liwanag. That was their direction that they wanted, and that was admirable for me. Something that I wasn't, in my own thinking, I wasn't that capable of doing. You know, so my means of expression was, it became like a refuge to do my artwork. So that was more or less, that's how I reacted to it.
Sir Nap was saying a while ago na you're doing reportage, siguro, I mean, coverages, and then, did I get you correctly na somehow na-anesthetize ka dun, and then you decided to do conceptual? Is that?
No, not because of that. I had two separate worlds. I mean, I worked during these times that I was doing these artworks. I was also working. I was a working professional photographer. I was working in advertising, but prior to that, I was doing documentaries of a filmmaker. We would go to the mountain province, we'd go to Palawan, we'd do ethnographic films, and then I did some work with Kidlat Tahimik. So it was really more, my film it was a separate kind of world. I mean, I would witness things like that, oppression and stuff. It's interesting because when I went up the mountain province, when we shot Father Balweg, and we camped out, we went out there, and the first person I saw was somebody that I recognized from here, from UP. It was a woman that I knew that was part of this movement here, and I saw her there. She was part of Father Balweg's group. So it was something I'm not totally divorced with that, but it was a work thing. I don't know if you can call it callous, but that's how I don't know if I isolated myself, but I did a really separation from that. My photography, essentially, it's actually even not it's crazy. I mean, I'm a Filipino photographer, no, visual artist. I have to qualify that. I'm a visual artist using photography as my medium. And if you look at my works, they don't reflect any of my culture. It doesn't, it doesn't reflect any of my ethnicity. I've become like every man. So that's how it was for me when I was working. There was no conscious or unconscious effort to show my ethnicity.
So, sir, siguro to support siguro yung conversation natin about that time, the spirit of the time, diba? So, this one is from, well, kasi kanina we also mentioned a little bit of the, parang, nagkaroon ng parang, di man friction. I mean, sige, let's call it friction. Kasi the way it's framed by Wubin is that there's a friction between those two camps, no? But just to give you an idea, ano ba yung parang isa sa mga laman or substance of those issues, specifically from Johnny Manahan? Because I think he was the one who was very vocal about the distinction of the formal and the conceptual. So this one is one of the quotes that we can get from Zhang Wubin. And then quoting Johnny Manahan and also Franco Patriarca. For those who don't know, Franco Patriarca naman would be the president at this time, 1974-75, was the president of the Camera Club of the Philippines. So that's an entire practice also, or an entire discourse. Then you have the journalistic work, na coverages, la Luis Liwanag, Sir Tata Hill is here. So Tata Hill is also here. Diba? So yun, so there's one practice of photography that way, in that manner. And then you have the camera clubs. And then you have, actually yun yung gusto kong tanongin, sir. Somehow, I feel like the highlighted works in CCP are the ones by conceptual photographers or visual artists. So to ask you, sir, during that time, where do you exhibit? And is it correct to conclude na because of Ray Albano, there was an emphasis, or siguro, not emphasis, but there's a highlight of your specific tradition of the conceptual tradition?
Well, when you say conceptual, for me there's a big difference. If you think about it, especially in Johnny's case, Johnny's an artist, visual artist, who uses photography as one of his means of expression. And vis-a-vis Frankie Patriarca, who's actually also a graphic designer and a photographer, very polished. So it was very, the remark was really directed towards specific work, because Frankie also did sequential work like the way I did. But it was polished, very polished. So it was more, there was a stronger emphasis on form and style rather than content. And in my context, it was really more, like I said, it was really the content that was important for me. I mean, though, again, if you see my work, they're also quite technically proficient, because that is my foundation. I can do something or I can do it badly, and that would be art, right? In fact, I've done things like that where it would really go against the grain of what I do professionally, because, like I said, I'm a professional. I can shoot you a great sunset. I can shoot you a great portrait. I can shoot you a great still life, because I'm a professional. But then when I do my own work, I usually just use my form, parang unconsciously, parang binababoy ko eh. Para masabi na, di ba, masyado kang malinis. The term is malinis. The work is too clean. No, I don't want it that way. That's why, again, there's a series there where it was for Rogue Magazine on their feature on photography. What I did was I shot a roll of 120 film, and I used the camera that could do multiple exposures. And what I did was all random multiple exposure shots. There was no planning. I just pointed my camera to an object, and then rewound, rewound it, put the same frame to shoot another image over on top of the first one, and I just find another random image and then just shoot it. And so it wasn't studied. I wasn't doing like montage that was like, you know, you see a face and then there's a sunset behind. No, none of that. It was all very, very rough. And then I'd take pictures of a sheet of acetate that was all dirty and screwed up so that I could add more texture to it. So it was really, that was my form of expression because it's more personal. I mean, there's no bias. There's no professional bias.
So to give some to locate din siguro yung inexplain ni Sir Nap na during that time yung practices might be there are different ways of exploring photography, and yung pinili ni Sir Nap would be more on yung term mo parang reaction to what you've seen, and then injecting a certain expression from it with to it, and then
No, I will interject again. Because at the time, specific to that is like, there was a show at the CCP called Nine Photographers. But if you look at the lineup, a big percentage of them were actually visual artists. People like Judy Sibayan, Ray Albano. They're not photographers, but they use photography as part of their art making. So that's the difference there. You know, like for me naman, I'm a photographer and I use photography as my form of art making. But then I use it in the same spirit as artists, because there's always been a crossover since the early 60s. In New York, artists were using film and photography. Warhol was actually using photography, you know, so it was really not a straightforward photographer. For me, the only photographer that's really a true visual, if you have to say conceptual photographer, was Man Ray. If you look at the works of Man Ray during the time, his association with the Surrealists in France, his works are purely photographic. He never painted. It was always photographs. It's always conceptual. For me, that was really, he's a pure, if you have to use the word conceptual photographer, he was the one, because it was in the spirit, or it was his background, it was really a true art.
so I think we're also burdened by that term. I think kasi that was parang how you were described by Miss Marian, no? I think that's also where we're coming from. Is there a way that we can not use it? Pwede, I think later baka hindi natin gagamitin yun. Pero just to parang to give lang din yung sinasabi ni Sir Nap na 9 photographers. This is the lineup of 9 photographers. So, and also again, provisional lang yung word na conceptual. Again, we've been highlighting that yung contentiousness of that term conceptualist and the conceptual, and the formal and the formalist. Pero if we're going to come up with maybe parang to locate siguro the practices. So this can be at least one way to distinguish, because if you go to the 5 photographers, most of them I think were sa sir, diba? Sa magazines and newspaper, sila Romy Vito.
There are publications and news also. You're talking about Mario Co.
Tapos ito yung sa
Toto Enriquez, Joe Gabor, Ed Santiago, and Romy Vito. They're really photographers, and that's how they did. But they had very strong. Their imaging was also very distinct and different. Here naman on the left side, I mean, I'm not saying all of them, but you know, people like Neil. Neil was also essentially a photographer, but Neil is very explorative in his use of photography. Butch Perez also was the same filmmaker, also uses photography as an artistic expression. Judy Sibayan is, of course, is a painter. Litz Benipayo, Noli Garalde is a photographer, but again, his use of photography was also different. So, but I guess or Mar, para I guess it's really the intention. If you have to say again, that's why I cringe when you apply a term like conceptualism because it's not. I would say innovative would be a better word for it for me, instead of a conceptualist, because I think that term was actually born out of Art Forum in the 70s. I mean, I got so immersed in that during the time when I used to hang out with Sinababi Chabet and Shop 6. It's like, I have marbles there. That's art. That's my art. You cannot question me on me on what I did because that's my art. But that's again sometimes the artist also has a responsibility to an audience to be able to concretize and to justify the work that he does. And a lot of times, especially people who do crazy things like that, they have a track record. They've been doing that thing. So that means it is not a one-time whimsy that they just decided to do.
Sir, just to clarify, because in the literature, it says this, there was an exhibit at at Shop 6. So, ikaw yung isa dun sa mga naka-exhibit dun? Dun sa yung
Ang
kasabay
concept
dito?
ng Shop 6 was actually parang alternative gallery, alternative artist space. Kasi at the time, we used to hang out in Sining Kamalig. It was a gallery in the 70s along Taft Avenue. And the owners allowed us, they had a portion of their compound that had shops, commercial shops. And there were some vacancies. There was one that was a vacant. So she decided, the owners decided, we'll lend it to you. You can do whatever you want. So every week one of the people from Shop 6 would have a one-man show. They called it a one. So you could have, so let's say, one Friday it would be Yoli Laudico. One Friday it would be Modesto Fernando. One Friday it would be me. One Friday it would be Joe Bautista. So it was really more of that. It was more spontaneous and it was really work that was non-traditional, if I have to use the word. So that was the offshoot of that. And then this was actually a work, this was, I think, Judy Sibayan and also Danny Dalena. They decided to just go there, park there in the parking lot, bring the cake and eat and take pictures. And that was their art form. So, parang gano'n, it's very whimsical nga eh. Kaya nga, it's very contentious when people say, it's also dismissive when you say, yeah, they're conceptual artists, Parang, parang ano nga eh. For me, like abstract expressionism eh. Ba't ka na-abstract, di ba, boy? Kasi hindi ka marunong magpinta eh. Abstract ka na lamang, di ba?
I think you're the first na artist na explicitly sinabi na I'm okay ma-label as conceptual if needed, but if you're on your own, parang you don't want that label.
I don't.
So you're the first one na that's, and also that's interesting for me.
It's also self-serving eh.
Ano, sir?
Self-serving. It's too self-serving.
Oh, ayun. So yun. So kaya yun ah. So for just to clarify again, the words that we're using, they're provisional only for the purpose of parang giving us an anchor, 'di ba? But then again, as Sir Nap mentioned, you're even uncomfortable with that term, no? So question now, Sir Nap, is from this kind of works, you have been also doing video or film at the same time that you're doing your visual arts practice. Is it correct?
Yes, I'm beginning to incorporate video in my works now.
Okay.
And of course, it's a long time coming because essentially I'm known as a cinematographer and filmmaker. But for me, I hadn't gotten the balance to be able to use it. And I have a piece of work down there at the corner where I incorporated, it was for a show in Collier Wright, and it was more installation. What they did was the title of the show was called Underbelly, and it said the underbelly of a establishment. Collier Wright is an old house on off Nakpil in Malate. Really nice, beautiful old house, and it resonates with history and age, and it had that patina of authenticity, and for them to call it the title of the show Underbelly was very appropriate, and it was a 3-month show. It had me, it had Robin Rivera, who's a sound artist, and also a Dutch environmental videographer. So it's a combination show. So we did that. So we had sound going on, but I had my photographic images there. And what I did was I wanted to give the impression that if you could see through the walls, or if that cliche, if these walls can talk. So that was my takeoff point. So I said, I create windows with jalousie so that you can see through. And so I said, I'd use video. The very first time I had that show, that work exhibited, was in Arete. And at the time when I showed it in Arete, instead of using video images, I still used video, but it was still pictures. So I took pictures of like supposedly landscape. But sometimes within that, if you see a landscape, like trees, you'd see a little bit of movement, and then you realize if you watch it long enough, there are actually cars passing by. So again, that double edged thing of a video image appearing like a photograph. So, but now I've started using that now, and I've been doing a lot of exploration where I would shoot in video, I'll project it, and then I'll shoot it again, and I'll project it, and I'll shoot it again, and I'll project it. So it becomes I degrade the image. So it's like a deconstruction of what the image is about. So it's not the visual content that matters. For me, it's the process. Until it just literally, it's just a bunch of noise. Black and white noise na lang. Parang ganon. So that's my exploration. Again, exploration of the medium. That's important for me.
So if ever, sir, let's say your work is shown to someone that siguro doesn't have the same background or practice as we have, how does one enter a work of Nap Jamir?
I think if you look through it, I would say you see it, you react, and that's it. You don't have to put a deeper meaning to it. So, I said, what you see is what you get. So it's dependent. Different people react to same images in different ways. So for me, I'm happy with that. I said, as long as I've done what I wanted to do and shared it with people, I think that's fine with me.
And siguro, sir, since we've discussed yung production or your mode of production mo of your works, siguro I'll introduce din siguro yung conversation about the curators that worked with you. Because I think there's also one question of how does the curator affect the presentation and quote-unquote the meaning of the work, when in fact, pwedeng possible the artist would say na, yun nga, walang ibig sabihin to. So react as you want. So, given the 50 years of your work, how do you see the curatorial motives change across the years?
Well, I guess now everything is like, hindi naman I'm saying everything's like curated. Of course, curatorial direction is very important. It gives foundation and also form to a certain exhibition of works. It gives it direction, it gives it purpose. And I feel that it's important now because people are becoming more and more aware, not necessarily photography. I mean, art in general now, right? With better education, we appreciate art more. I mean, ideally, it would come to a level where appreciation, people who watch it. I mean, one interesting thing for me is the art fair. Art fair for me is it's Instagram paradise. That's how I would say what it is. Because you go there, you know, use that background as an Instagram thing, and it's for me. I'm happy because at least people that you couldn't drag 10 years ago, 5 years or 2 years ago into a gallery, are now going there and just having themselves, photographing themselves in this thing. So, and hopefully within that process, within that time, they can see and notice the artwork and begin to appreciate it. And that's a great step forward. And again, also in regards to art criticism, I mean, like, especially also critical writing on photography, I really like it. I appreciate it. The fact that, like I told you before, there's already philosophy involved in photography. I mean, photography is always it's a instinctive, for me, it's an instinctive gut reaction experience. And now you can contextualize it, you can, you know, there's a lot of, it also gives it more, more definition, and also it gives it more substance. People become more appreciative.
So, just for reference, though, that activity that we had in Ateneo, that is a project collaboration with Photography Chismis and Ateneo Art Gallery. But specifically to that subject, there is a subject in Ateneo entitled Philosophy of Photography. And it's a course or subject given or required for philosophy majors, not in their fine arts program. So ito yung one of the trajectories of how one di man new kasi Flusser was writing about this since 1980s. No, there's a book called Towards a Philosophy of Photography, 1983. So you can look for it. No, so kay Wilhelm Flusser. So during that time, again, time of exploration, hindi naman to bago, but to be formalized, quote unquote, formalized in an academic institution, 2023, if I'm not mistaken. So Dr. Barbasa, he's the former chair of the philosophy department in Ateneo, and then he started this program. So ito yung one of the ways or methods or entry points to photography na hindi nanggagaling specifically from the art. Yun nga kasi yung ano, so hindi siya galing sa fine arts na program. So ito yung just to give you context on how that happened yung sa Ateneo Art Gallery. And yes, sir.
Yeah, so sorry. One of the things also for me, like the explosion of writing on photography is because of schools. Education is so very important. In fact, people taking photography, like in let's say kay Sir Francis, their program, they're aware now of people critical writing on that. People like Susan Sontag writing on photography, Roland Barthes writing on photography, Derrida discussing photography, because even if they're photo majors, they have a very good foundation background on the literary context of what photography is all about, and that gives it more impetus. In fact, before, you know, you take pictures, and where do you get your education from? From other pictures, from other photographers. It's always been like that. It's passed around. Now there is a formal way of acquiring foundation for that.
Siguro yun, sir, no? So since we parang in our introduction, we mentioned one would be the art production, second would be the curatorial motives, that how it shapes, your work across the years. Then lastly, siguro yun nga, yung academic or at least yung pedagogy or learning na lang. Kasi medyo ano yung pedagogy, yung how is photography thought, no? So similar to your case and most of the practitioners during your time, they were taught by their fathers, no? So, and then, sabihin natin sila Ernie Sarmiento by yung tatay niya kay Jose Sarmiento. Sila, no, I mean, halos lahat, halos lahat. So, Romy Vitog, tapos yung tatay niya si Honesto. So, given that history of how photography has been taught, what's the major, what can you observe as the major difference or changes or development from that 50 years that you've been working with photography?
No, I find it more, there's more critical, again, appreciation on photography. At the same time, there is more interest. I mean, Benilde already has a degree in photography, right? I mean, it's become something where, in my time, that was unthinkable. You know, when I was in college, there's such thing as a degree in photography. I mean, because we haven't reached that level of knowledge and also of appreciation. I like also to put it within the context of another, of cinema. You know, essentially, I'm a cinematographer. I'm a filmmaker. I mean, the leaps and bounds that we've had in Philippine cinema now, at present, worldwide, is because we were able to introduce and establish a formal film school. A formal film school. Even in countries like Iran, which is very revolutionary, they've got great cinema from Iran because they have a film school. Education is very important. I mean, right now, more and more, I mean, the younger ones, they're taking pictures. The ones who are beginning to appreciate and do photography, they choose analog photography because that's a good foundation to start with instead of digital. You know, so I find it more exciting this year's. In fact, I can name one, somebody like one of our choices. I was a jury in, I think, the 2024 13 artist selection. And one of the people who selected was Jeloy Concepcion, who was a photographer, but you've seen his work, right? He erases outlines of people in his pictures and does questions and uses questions. So social, well, it could be political, but he posits a different context. It becomes sociological in nature. And that's been something that's interesting. I mean, to find photography being done that way. And then like Poklong and Anding doing photography in a different way. You know, so that's progress for me. You know, it just so happens, like for me, again, personally, it just so happens that my direction was as an artist, not a photographer, essentially. I started doing film, and then the first pictures I take were these ones. I never went into sunsets. In fact, I have a section there of still pictures. But still pictures that I took, and because I said, I was in France at the time, Paris, I said, hey, I might as well do, you know, I'm in the city that created people like Cartier-Bresson, Robert Doisneau. Why don't I try taking, like, not reportage, but essays? And I did. But you know, the thing there is, I said I want to do it differently. So I created my images by using a cinematic term called La Nuit Americaine, where you use a filter to create day for night effects. So I'd be taking pictures in the daytime, but it would look like night. So that was how again, because it was another take, I didn't want to do something conventional.
That trajectory of you working with stills to video, somehow I see that it's logical movement lang din talaga siya of the development. But do you also see a specific distinction? I mean, obviously there's a distinction, pero on your side as a visual artist, how do you see, sige, sabihin natin cinema or experimental film different from photography, at least in photographic terms?
Actually, it's interesting because there's a lot of photographers now who actually use cinema as Cindy Sherman. is a good example. She takes self-portraits, mimicking still pictures, still publicity pictures from movies. So she comes out as Marilyn Monroe. She comes out in, and also Gregory Crudson would recreate like you think it's a film scene, but it's actually a photograph. Everything staged, everything lit like a cinema. So there is a strong appreciation of that. So that resonates for me. I like that. There's a crossover. That's a crossover.
This tendency or parang this movement towards interdisciplinarity, I guess. I think yun nga, I mean I would agree with you, sir, that at least in even in schools in our school, ganun din. There's an openness now to talking about photography as part or a component of an artist project. So not necessarily it's the end goal, but photography is could be one of those processes within that entire slow process. And I think we're also more open now to the discussion of photo media as compared to photography. So the one emphasizes on the material, the other one focuses on the discourse. So I think yun yung medyo nagiging distinction between photo media as a term versus photography as discourse. And also, just to some references din, I think yung sinasabi ni Sir Nap na references about writing. So this one is writing from the 1981. So I think if you're hello. So if you're researching about photography, so ito yung one source during that time. But siguro as a way then siguro to parang to be more conciliatory to our discussion. Siguro kasi nga as a disclaimer, no, sinabi naman natin kanina na even if we're using these terminologies, consider lang na they're provisional, they're contentious, and I think it would usually depend on your context. Kung nasa school ka ba, if you're from a camera club, if you're a practitioner, the terminologies might be contingent. Baka hindi naman niya kailangan ng labels in the first place. But in case lang na gusto niyo mag-research about yung terminologies and siguro a conciliatory view of it is one source could be kay Doc Patrick, no? So as mentioned in this text na parang I think the way Doc Patrick reconciles the terminologies is put it in historical material context. So basically the names partly is contingent to the historical and material reality of how these different practices came to be. So I think yun yung the way that's how I read yung kay Doc Patrick, no. So not really to make it uniform, but at least one trajectory would be historical material trajectory para at least we can read it based on its context. So yun lang yung nakita ko na this is one text that can be way into that reconciliatory or conciliatory stance towards these differences. So siguro, sir, before we open the floor to questions, how do you think would photography move in the next 10 years? Siguro 10 years na lang muna kasi yung hirap ng 20 years. 10 years na lang. So,
Hindi, ako, I feel that formal, okay, again, I'll have to use words that I have to probably be regretting. Formalist photography will still go on because we're surrounded by that. I mean, you look at magazines, you look at your social media. These are images that are shown there are still part of an old school of print. So you have that. It is always present. So there will always be people, practitioners, photographers, who will actually move towards that. There will always be camera clubs. There will always be photo competitions. Photo-moto will always be there in one form or another. But again, there will be more diverse directions toward exploring alternative forms of photography, if I have to use that word. I'll give you an example. Okay. you look at photography and say it's two-dimensional, okay? Now, let's say I have a photograph, but I don't want it three-dimensional. I don't want to be able to hold it. What I'll do is I'll create a machine that will project a mist of water, thin mist of water. And I will project my photograph there. So the photograph will only exist while the mist is there. Once that disappears, it becomes ephemeral. Is that still a photograph? That would be a direction that would be interesting to explore for me. I mean, photographs that are reflected on water. I mean, you know, things which are not permanent, things which are, I mean, trying to defy the concept of a traditional photograph. Then that would be directions that probably visual artists will explore. They'll be able to use, because photography is just a tool now. I mean, the fact that there's been so many crossovers. I mean, sculptors, painters, dancers. Photography has always been that. The visual medium has always been part, or has always been a tool. So to be able to explore that further would be a great way. For me, that's how I look at it.
Hello, yun. So just to add lang siguro this, since you also mentioned, sir, yung ano, no, is it a photograph? Ayun. Kasi ngayon, there's another, obviously, everyone's aware of images that are quote-unquote photographic. So this is an example, no? So I'm using this because this was made by a Filipino. Siguro ano, you can siguro accuse me of trying to nationalize yung discourse, but I mean to just emphasize lang on the practices in the Philippines. This one is one of the earliest that I know of AI quote unquote photography. So if I didn't mention that this is AI, you might have thought that these are photographs. And this was made by Joseph Desmond Cruel. Siya yung head of research. Siya yung head of research ng ABS-CBN. So interesting that the art or the art object came about as a result of a commercial motive. So basically, he works for ABS-CBN. He's trying to research technologies wherein they would be able to speed up the production process sa TV. And he came across generative AI. And being one of the first people in the Philippines to do it, he made this. And during this time, ano pa to? Hindi pa to, ano na yung ginagamit before? Ano pa to? This is still DALL-E. This is the first version ng DALL-E. So imagine how, I mean, if you see images like this in the wild, we can just imagine how our perception of what is real will change or has changed across the last 20 years. So you would include kasi yung diba? From TV to cinema, and then you have internet, and then this AI, no? So you can see it, you can look at it as a 20-year development, not just 2020s. So, and also you can also consider na this is one of the reasons why photography seemed to find allegiance with philosophy. So kaya naging ako personally as someone who also teach, when we have papers used in class, there's a huge part of it that is philosophical, quote unquote, in the sense that you're citing not art writers but philosophers. So for example, Lacan, quoting sabihin natin niya si Barthes, diba? O Baudrillard. So these are cultural writers, not necessarily art writers. And some of these writers are also being counted or historically labeled as philosophers. So kaya I think yun din yung reason kung bakit medyo open din yung philosophy to these kinds of discussions, because what is the ground which we can state that this is real given the 21st century technologies, all of those things. So, yun na yung pang classroom na yun. Pero, yun. So, I'm just showing this because if we're going to situate the discussion on moving forward from your work that last 50 years and then the next 10 years, this might be, I don't know, baka i-include ni Sir Nap to sa projects niya. And in general, sa
retrospective ko na 100 years.
So yun, that's that question of what is photography in the first place. That's also one of the discourses that we try to open in Photography Chismis. What is photography in the first place? So with that, sir, so we open the floor to questions. Wow. Any questions? Yes, sir.
It's just an observation. No? Photography was invented or na-invento ang photography because of art. No? So ang first photography talaga, it's not about documenting news or it's about, that's why when photography was invented, the artists at that time were questioning that photography is not an art. Kasi kalaban nila eh. Because like, uso nun portraiture, like portraiture, no? Mga prominent, mayayaman lang dati ang nagpapo-portrait eh. So mga visual artists ang gumagawa nun, no? Pero nung ma-invento yung photography, ang bilis, no? Gawa ka agad. Tapos, realistic pa. Totoong tsura, nakagawa nila. I mean, ang gusto ko sabihin, yung ginawa ni Nap, no? Yung pinapaliwanag ni Nap ngayon, lumagpas pa eh, no? Bumalik siya eh, at nilagpasan niya pa uli. Yung ano ang photography. Ang photography before, when it was invented, is for art. Now, ginawa ni Nap, nilagpasan niya pa, no? Yung art niya, yung art ng photography, ginawa niya pang mass art, mass artistic. So, thank you very much, Nap.
So, sir, si Tata Hill is a photojournalist. So,
Given your title of ano yan, Walang Ibig Sabihin, do you must film not speak? I'm a filmmaker as well, a beginner, and they don't like talkies. They don't like scripts with like a lot of dialogue, despite obviously several examples of success, right? So, film is a visual medium apparently, but I disagree. I think it can speak, and it's most meaningful perhaps when it simulates life, right? And there's a lot of talking in life. And so the idea of film not speaking is almost patriarchal to me. I don't know if you agree.
Again, I'll take it within the context of what photography is. I mean, well, there are two different mediums. I mean, essentially, film incorporated movement and also incorporated sound. Photography it's a print. I mean, but even in film, there are a lot of filmmakers who actually use silence as a good way of bringing their concepts across. And even like the concept of real-time filming, like 12 hours, like there are different interpretations. I think cinema right now also is at the cusp where it will actually start to explode. Primarily it's entertainment, right? It was really created for entertainment, but now it's gone beyond that. I mean, serious filmmakers have actually explored using the medium as a means of transforming society, as a means of rebellion, as a means of making statements. So uh, one of the good, a lot of the good films before were silent movies, because it really depended on the whole concept of visual, communicating visually. You know, so I think it has its, no, I mean, not necessarily it's mandatory to have a lot of talkies, but it's an integral part, especially when it comes to entertainment. No, 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 no. I'm not putting in the context of gender here. I'm talking in the context of film as itself. I mean, the fact that man, there's so many films now, and a lot of films are actually, a lot of people are working with films now, which are just as a medium. Like for me, I have a camera that shoots analog film, but it's called the Lomo Kino. So it shoots 35 millimeter film, but you have to wind it like the first time. And so that in itself is already a statement. You can make it, you use it, but you cannot use sound. You cannot sync, not unless you can clap sync it, right? And things, then you can have that context. But then the level of experimentation that you have, the opportunities that you can use with that, where you can actually vary the speed of your movement in shooting, is already a major thing. So it's a good medium.
Thank you. Taking off from her comments, really, I was wondering why you named this Walang Ibig Sabihin nga. And now while you were talking, is what you mean is that your pictures don't really, I mean, your photographs don't really carry any meaning, and you mentioned it's the process. Am I right? Yeah. But does that qualifier go for all photographs, that all photographs don't have meaning, but they are just capturing moments for yeah, classical photography? Does that?
I thought she was going to get mad at me. No, the title itself, it was really, it's like a pun on the process itself. The fact that I'm using a very rigid method of photography, I mean, photo identification process, right? There's nothing you can do about it. You go inside the booth, the camera takes your pictures, and then the pictures come out, right? And it's there. But I said, let's do something, let's do some intervention. And that's what I did. So I've done, so when I put that title, Walang Ibig Sabihin, it essentially, like, it's more of a pun on the process itself. The fact that you have to title it, the fact that I gave it a title doesn't really, makes it more, not ironic, but makes it more parang satirical in that sense.
Your, your Foto-Me's of Tikoy that work, I get it, walang ibig sabihin talaga. Am I right?
They were just gestures that we were playing around with. In fact, as a part of the series, I lost it, but I did things where I would cover the light source from the Foto-Me booth. I'd cover it so that it doesn't use light, and then I'd bring a candle. So I'd have a Foto-Me series where I have candles to light my face, or flashlights. I just light myself with flashlight. So really, that's a complete intervention that really goes against the grain of what a Foto-Me machine process does. So there's a lot of things you can do. Or you can put backgrounds behind. You can put like a mountain background behind while you're posing Foto-Me. Or you can do something like trompe-l'oeil. You can have a projector that can project. There are portable projectors now. You can actually put portable projectors. So you cover the source light, use the projectors, and you're part, it's like a trompe-l'oeil. You become part of the background. A lot of things you can do with Foto-Me. And you can use smoke, and then you can use mirrors or prisms There's a lot. In fact, I'm trying to interest National Gallery of Singapore to give me a grant to do another series of Foto-Me's. I shared the new ones. I'm very fascinated with it.
As a photographer that experienced both the classical process of photography and also experienced the use of digital, looking at it now, is there any of like the analog? Do you prefer like analog or digital now?
That's the same question I usually get when they ask me as a cinematographer, do you like to shoot in film or do you like to shoot digitally? For me, I always welcome change. So that's the whole point there in technology. Technology is not bad. It's not, hindi siya kaaway. I mean, film was there. The advantages of technology at present outweighs the advantages of film. Film has become, I don't want to use the word relic, but it's there. It's a good foundation. Without film, there is no photography to talk of, because that's a takeoff point. So I would welcome any kind of change is fine with me, even in terms of lighting. I adapt to what comes. That's how I am.
Any more questions? Ayan, si Alvin.
Sir, bakit mas pinili nyo yung black and white na palette as opposed to color?
Magandang tanong yan. Okay. Ang unang-unang rason is mahal ang color film. Pero hindi yun. I mean, really, if you look historically, photography has always been associated with black and white. And the tonality of a black and white, the chiaroscuro, is more pronounced. And the second reason, I haven't mastered color. Even the times I were doing it, if I was like a photographer like Alex Webb or Susan Maicelas that uses color, or Ernst Haas that uses color predominantly as part of their visual grammar and language, I would do so, but I'm still very hesitant. I'm still like a babe in the woods when it comes to color. But like I said, photography, black and white, it's very truthful for me. It's very strong, very truthful.
Going back to that previous question of walang ibig sabihin, I think for me, it's a way of giving us audience the freedom to interpret whatever element or concept that the photographer or the artist is trying to communicate. See, like, well, it may be that I have a different interpretation or perception of the visual image, and the other guy has another. But by saying that, well, walang ibig sabihin, meaning to say that it depends on you. What element did you see in the image? How it affects you? And definitely, it's a very different experience for every individual. Like another way of saying that, ganyan lang. Ganon, di ba?
For me, it's like, of course, this example pales in comparison to what I was referring to. Marcel Duchamp, he made ready-mades, things like urinals. I mean, it's really the I don't want to use the word stupidity, but it's really I'd say the paradox of something that is ordinary. Because, for example, if somebody gets a urinal or a flat iron and brings it to a gallery and says it's art, it doesn't mean anything. But if you know, Duchamp carries it and puts it in the gallery, then it has meaning. But then it becomes more, how do you say, becomes more of a statement. So it's colored by a lot of things. But again, for me, Walang Ibig Sabihin is really like Walang Ibig Sabihin. It's like my images. In fact, when you see some of my images, they're actually very obvious. That's why the first works I did were actually sequential. So it's like, you know, reading a comic book because it's there. The only punchline there is actually it went beyond the frame. You know, you see blood spilling into the mat board, into the floor. The original one was supposed to be blood still continuing in an art gallery, an ideal art gallery situation, if I wanted that. It should have been like blood continuously flowing into the floor of the gallery. So it's a active, very active artwork. It's not, it's kinetic in that sense, you know. Or paper, when I tear myself, you see the paper will be actually in the floor of the gallery. So parang it jumped out of the frame, parang ganon. Pero again, walang ibig sabihin.
Siguro to add dun, sir, dun sa sinabi mo, no? Yeah, at least on the teaching side, we emphasize that in the same manner that very simplistic to and very reductive. In the same manner that a sentence could mean different ways in different contexts, we remind that visual images has to be seen contextually. So if ever the conversation is happening on sabihin natin sabihin natin yung discursive register is philosophy, probably the way it would be expanded or explored will be using the tools within that discourse. If we're using photography in scientific purposes, for example, satellite images, microscopy, photogrammetry, that's still photography, but you might not read it, quote unquote, read it with the same language or the same methods or modes of reading if it's in the scientific context, because the assumption, at least contextually, it was done as a means of answering a scientific question or a scientific research. It's part of a scientific research. So satellite imaging, even radiography, for example, radiography, or even yung x-rays, diba? Medical uses siya. If a doctor is given an x-ray of a person, you'll not read it as art. You'll not read it as art. You'll read it in the context of that application. So parang very Wittgenstein, diba? So Wittgenstein. So basically the practice comes first. So where is it used? So you read it right where it's being used, and then you explore outwardly. That's one way of reading it. So kung sabihin natin if it's a photograph of sabihin natin the drug war, diba? At least siguro foundationally we should read it for the political content that it has and the reportage content that it has. If we're going to assign or impose a meaning that it is the pieta, like for example yung kanila Rafi, diba? So si Rafi is also a UP graduate. So yun, so if you're going to read it as the pieta, at least sana hindi makalimutan the foundational context of it being a report. We're not saying that the addition of that reading of the pieta is detrimental to the work. We're just saying that there's one level that you read it as journalistic or reportage and then you work from that context. Obviously, there will be exceptions, regardless if it's intentional or unintentional. There will always be exceptions. But at least in terms of teaching visual language, we emphasize that it would be good. It's not necessarily a complete imposition. It would be good to read it within that context where it emanates, where that object emanates, who made it, the context of that historical, political, cultural situation. And kaya important, at least in the academe, to research hindi lang yung work, but the production, the series of activities, the authors, the viewers at that time, para mayroon kang grounding, diba? If you want to totally divorce it from that grounding, it's up to you. I think that's possible. And I think there's, diba? I mean, there has been works na ganon. But at least, when we teach, more or less, we emphasize, find the context first as a way of due diligence, diba? And then work from there. In some cases nga, pag mga classes namin, we bracket yung term na art. Siguro a confession, specifically in my classes. Sometimes we bracket muna yung term na art. We try to, kasi somehow, personally, I feel there's a baggage when discussing photography with that parang overbearing term art. I'm not discounting that, no. But I'm saying lang na because there's a huge literature of photography from the art history, discourse, sometimes hindi nababasa rin yung iba pang discourses that pertains to the same object. So there's a scientific discourse, there's a pedagogical, historical. Kaya important din yung interdisciplinarity, I guess, because even if in one discourse may emphasis how it's read, it becomes richer if you introduce other discourses in that discussion. So kaya yung discursive registers when it comes to photography, sometimes personally I bracket that term art first para at least we can focus siguro on the indexicality of what a photograph is, diba? So we can isolate siguro provisionally, and then eventually you reintroduce that to the discussion. Kasi for example ni Sir ni Tata Hill, no, even photojournalists would usually go back to that historical period na art versus photography, yung during the, diba, 1830s to 1840s, diba? Yung malaking discussion na art ba yan. So ako, when I discuss sa class, medyo binabracket ko muna, and then we go to the indexical qualities, what is it, diba? And then reintroduce it later on. Syempre, I'm not saying na dapat yun, pero that's how I treat it, at least in class. Any question?
Hello sir, question lang. Regarding do sa materials, kasi meron din po kayong video work diyan sa loob. So how does it become a video work and become a print? Ano pong nag-decide? Yung conscious decision niyo po ba beforehand or yung concept yung nag-guide? Ano pong
Again, there's really no preconceived notion of I'm going to use video or I'm going to use. Sometimes the work, parang the medium is dictated by the work itself. I mean, like for example, like where I have the video, it's because what I wanted to do was to create a portal that you can actually see through. Like this one's a portal into the past, or it's a portal into something that is probably happening in the future, diba? Because it's like ecological destruction, stuff like that. So that would be the context. For me, it's always been, but predominantly 90% of what my work there is, it's all photography. But what's also interesting, I'd like to also bring up is, if you notice there's one wall there where I have images of my Instagram. And that's the thing that has actually made me very happy, because trying to create or trying to do something like art in the context of what I've done before takes a bit of time. And for me, Instagram is like instant gratification. It marries parang what I lacked before as a foundation as a photographer, shooting landscapes and formal photography. I'm getting it back there, but then it's based on more than 40 years of visual incubation. I mean, again, what I am right now visually is a product of a long period of influences and experimentation, stuff like that. But I'm very happy with the Instagram because it keeps my visual mind active, and it's good practice. That's why.
Any more questions? So siguro, wala na? So with that, Sir Nap, thank you very much. And also to our audience, no. So thank you for staying for 2 hours, 1.5 hours, kasi nga 4:30 tayo nag-start. And if you have questions, so we will just be here if you want to ask about anything regarding the Sir Nap's show. Actually, he might do a tour, I think, later. Also, on my side, if you have any inquiries about the project, what is Photography Chismis, what are the writing projects that we have in the coming months, we have that, no? So we'll post. Tapos I hate to say it, pero you can check yung page namin and you can follow. So yun. So that's Photography Chismis in Facebook and Photography Chismis on Instagram. It's more or less pinaka basic. It's a billboard of what's happening in photography. And then, from there, iba-ibang projects yung ginagawa namin, iba-ibang collaborations. So, with that, thank you everyone, and thank you to UP Parola. Okay, thank you everyone.